High Court in Johannesburg will today hear Ace Magashule's challenge to have his suspension overturned. Magashule was suspended by the ANC last month following the implementation of the party's step-aside resolution, which calls on members facing criminal charges to step down until they are cleared by a court of law. However, the argument is that the party cannot rely on the NPA's decision on who is criminally charged as the basis for its step-aside policy. Now, to unpack Magashule's legal arguments, I have with me our politics editor, Sbu Ngalwa, and legal analysts, Mpumelelo, Zikalala, and Benedict Vilagazi. Gentlemen, to all of you, thank you very much for making the time. Let me start here in studio. Sbu, let's deal with the conversation that Mbali Tetane had just moments ago with Kalni House. He says Ace Magashule has not seen the indictment of the charges that he faces, which relates to the asbestos matter in Bloemfontein. Is that true? You have been at that court on numerous occasions.
That's an incorrect statement, Xoli, because we do know that the ANC Secretary General was served with the indictment in that case. In fact, the charge sheet, which is 58 pages, he also received the charge sheet. And to support that, in fact, one of his vocal supporters within the NEC, in response to that very charge sheet, Dakota Lekhwete, who's also an NEC member of the NEC, penned an opinion piece tearing apart, basically, that charge sheet. Arguing that it still did not provide enough evidence which would pin guilt on the Secretary General.
So Kalni House is lying. Why does he need to lie? Why does he need to lie? We know that he's a supporter of Ace Magashule, but why the fibs?
Look, I cannot answer that one, but I guess in politics lies are not unusual, and also I guess perhaps to fit a particular narrative. But I think what we can state categorically is that there is an indictment that was served on the ANC Secretary General, and I know that the argument is always that they always argue that he's being charged for not giving or not paying or not actually exercising oversight, which is not what the indictment says.
Yeah.
Because if you recall, during the last court appearance, there were new people who were added to the charge sheet. That includes the head of legal services in the Premier's office, and the NPA there is making a direct link between Ace Magashule and the 230 or 250 million rand asbestos case, where they are saying there, Xoli, that big tenders of a particular amount, major tenders, were being handled at the Premier's office. So in a way, making a direct link to say that that tender would have moved from the Premier's office via the Department of Housing to Blackhead Consulting, and in a way explain why then there were those gratifications or those payments that were made on behalf of Mr. Magashule. That is, at the very least, is what the NPA is alleging in this particular case.
All right, Sbu, thank you very much for setting that up for us. Let's bring into the conversation Mr. Zikalala and Mr. Phiri. Let me start with you, Mpumelelo Zikalala. Rule 25.7 of the ANC. This particular rule, as I've been saying, is probably going to be front and center of this argument by Ace Magashule. He argues very strongly that this is a factional way, or this is a rule that is now being used by those who have the political clout at the moment within the ANC in order to purge others. Your sense here, am I interpreting this correctly, that Rule 25.70 is going to be front and center? And what is your understanding of this particular rule?
Definitely, but you must look at it within the context of the whole Constitution. If you look at this rule, it appears under what the ANC Constitution terms as instances of suspension. So it does cater for instances where one is supposed to be suspended and due to him or her appearing in a court of law. Now, what is crucial when it comes to this rule is that who has the power to suspend. And if you read the rule, it says it is the General Secretary or the Provincial Secretary. acting under the authority of the NEC, NWC, or PEC. Now, the question would be that maybe the team of Mr. Magashule would have to answer. This rule was passed in a democratic conference, which has then endorsed and said this rule is okay, which then means that anyone who wants to join or wants to remain a member of the ANC has to subscribe to this rule and say, I voluntarily want to be a member of the ANC and hence its constitution. So you can't come at a later stage and say, this particular rule is being used to purge people when you were part and parcel of the people that actually endorsed it. The question would be, why didn't you raise those issues at an earlier stage? But most importantly, as the SG of the political party, you are the custodian of all the provisions that are in the Constitution. Why did you remain quiet all this time and only raise it when it is only you, or when the rule pertains to you? What may be a problem of what maybe if he had based his papers on, it would have succeeded. It is the procedures that is followed. So when it comes to the people that are given the power to suspend, because the rule is clear here, it says the SG or the provincial secretary, but it doesn't give instances where it is actually the SG that has a problem. Maybe they would then have to explore and look at the rule in its entirety, because if you then look at 25.56, in that instance, if the NEC had followed that particular rule, then they would be clear, home clear in terms of saying, we have done all that we could, we have followed every process that are there, and we are indeed suspending the Secretary General for non-compliance or for suspicions or for things in which we are saying as the ANC, we can't have an SG who's attending court. Can you please step aside while we deal with your issues?
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that you bring up the element about how Ace Magashule kept quiet, and at the time of the endorsement of this rule, the papers that are filed on behalf of the ANC, signed by Jesse Duarte, they actually point to Ace Magashule himself distributing these to provincial structures. So, which means that he was very aware of what this rule says. Let's come to you, Babu Phiri. The other element here is about the Integrity Commission that also comes into play here, because this is now the disciplinary element, because Rule 25.70 itself is not exactly a punitive measure, if you like. The party says this rule is here to preserve the integrity of the ANC, that if a member, particularly if they hold public office, or they're an office bearer, or a member in the legislature, to preserve the integrity of the ANC, step aside, deal with your matters until such time that you are cleared. But then there is the Integrity Commission of the party, Benedict Phiri. And the Integrity Commission plays a particular role here. Take us through what your understanding of the Integrity Commission and where they come into play around this issue of step aside.
Yes, Xoli. I think, so the important piece about the Integrity Commission is in respect of each member that is then considered to fall within the step-aside rule, then presents their case to the Integrity Commission, who then makes a recommendation based on how they've presented their case to the Integrity Commission around whether they should step aside or not. And in Ace Magashule's particular instance, he did appear before the ANC Integrity Commission, who then recommended that given the charges that he was facing, he should step aside. He then raises this question, obviously, in contrast to the position with respect to the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and saying that, with respect to the president, he didn't actually follow those processes to the T. And then this is where his question around factionalization comes from. But just to step back and just pin that onto the discussion you've been having with Mpumelelo earlier, I think there is a bigger wormhole that Ace Magashule is taking us to, but it's unfortunate that he's the one that's bringing the matter, because he's also saying that, well, look, the 2017 NASREC conference or 2017 conference actually had a broader step-aside rule. It didn't only deal with people who were facing charges or criminal charges or who had been indicted. it actually dealt with people that had even been accused of corruption.
Yeah.
So what has happened is that since 2017, we've watered this down, and the watering down is what serves the factional purposes. And which I think is a really good argument to bring when you think of what we're dealing here. We're dealing with corruption within a governing party. Yeah. But the problem is that he is not taking the high road and saying, well, even under the 2017 Nasrec resolution, I would have fallen within its ambit. Therefore, I'll actually just step aside for the sake of principle.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of like the sort of tension that this matter is bringing up. Yeah.
You know, you fleshed this out very nicely, because that's the other element that fits into, I guess, the narrative that is being driven here, or the argument that is being driven by Ace Magashule and those who support him, to say, why does it look like this has been tailor-made for certain individuals, particularly those who are charged and are in front of courts? Because there are those who are accused of serious issues such as corruption but are not yet charged. So how is the party dealing with that? But we'll continue with that in just a moment. Very good morning to you. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with Sbu Ngalwa, our politics editor here, and two legal eagles that are sitting virtually trying to dissect this particular issue of the ANC Secretary General, who's challenging his suspension from the party. Let me bring it back into studio. Sbu, Benedict Phiri raises a very important element to this case, to say Ace Magashule is going to argue that he's being targeted because there are those who are mentioned as having received either gratifications or have been involved in one way or the other in either influencing tenders that they be issued towards particular companies, and in turn those companies may give them some kind of reward, which in essence is corruption. Simple question. Those who are accused but are not necessarily charged before courts, what is the decision of the party around those people?
I think that actually is the big question currently facing the ANC now. Because remember, in as much as Ace Magashule has appeared before the Integrity Commission, and with the Integrity Commission recommending that he should step aside, he's not the only person who in the commission has asked that they step aside.
Yeah.
His only difference is that he has also been charged in court. Remember that also the Deputy Minister of Finance appeared before the Integrity Commission and was asked to step aside. So the ANC has yet to deal with that category of people.
Because why is he still in office? Why is he holding it?
Exactly. So which then strengthens the argument or the narrative of a possible witch hunt. In his court papers, Ace Magashule makes mentions of two people, particularly Minister of Minerals, Gwede and Deputy Minister of State Security, Zikalala, saying there have been allegations against them, but they have not been asked to step aside. Or he also seems to be suggesting that there is also selective prosecution, although it's not explicit, but there is that undertone that comes out of his argument. In fact, the very point that Benedict is making, he does make that point in his argument. He actually takes this back to the 2015 National General Council, which said people should consider stepping aside, and then which was refined in 2017 to say that those who are facing allegations, not charged, but allegations of corruption, should step aside. Now, that is all-encompassing. Yeah. And if I recall correctly, in one of the press conferences after the NEC, where they were trying to look at the implementation of that very step-aside resolution, the ANC did say that the resolution as it stands is too broad, and actually there would be no organization. Because effectively, anyone can make an allegation, then it would mean that you have to step aside, which then they argued to say that's why they had to go through the process of, one, getting legal opinion, and secondly, forming that committee that was led by former President Xoli Mngambi. But what I would want to expect, perhaps try and understand from Benedict is is it illegal, or is it not acceptable in law that, given the fact that you've got an NEC, which is the highest decision-making body in between conferences, for them to refine or to change or alter resolutions as they did with this particular one?
I think, the question really is, this is a constitutional point, right? It's not a resolution that is dealing with the day-to-day operations of the organization. This is a rule that entrenches itself firmly within the constitution of the ANC, and I think that's how we can understand Ace Magashule's argument, to say, well, the NEC or the NWC doesn't have the authority to make constitutional provisions. That authority only sits with constitutional structures which are in general council. So to the extent that that rule, as it now is seen in the Constitution, came from the NWC, then the NWC or the NEC then acted beyond its powers. And it's for that reason that it's unconstitutional, because it was taken by a body or a group that didn't have the powers to amend the ANC Constitution. So I think, that's really where his argument is going to be going. Yeah. Obviously, it's clouded with the issues of factionalism, which in his replying papers he says, well, I'm a bit sorry that I put so much color on this. I'm actually now focusing you on the legal argument, which is actually that. Yeah.
Isn't that rich, though, gentlemen, that you have Ace Magashule who says the constitution of the ANC, it has to align with the constitution of the country, because if it does not, then it is unconstitutional, because it essentially tramples on my rights as an individual. This coming from the same person who, when the former President Jacob Zuma was said to be trampling on this very constitution by refusing an instruction from the Constitutional Court, what did he say? He says, don't worry about the Constitution. Who remembers that? So, but we're going to come back to that particular matter. Let's quickly take you to outside Luthuli House, and that is where one of our colleagues, Pilane Pachati, is watching the situation there. Pilane, very good morning to you. What are you seeing from your end? What is happening? Is there anything at all outside Luthuli House?
Well, not much happening outside Luthuli House per se, but really just to get into it, the gloves are off. And Ace Magashule today, as we already rightfully say, is in the High Court to challenge his suspension. It is a virtual sitting, so that challenge by the SG is really contrary to his usual mantra that ANC quarrels should never, ever be adjudicated by the courts. But before the courts can really hear Magashule's plea, there are two applicants that have asked to be admitted as the friends of the court in support of Ace Magashule. So what they do want is that they want the court to declare two resolutions, 2 and 3 from the ANC's 2017 conference, as unconstitutional, invalid, and as well as unlawful. So those resolutions state that every member accused of or reported to be involved in corrupt practices accounts to the Integrity Committee immediately, and that's some of the processes I can hear you that in your panel discussions you've been touching on. So the request really to intervene also includes to the court that the Rule 25.7 dealing with the step-aside, Xoli, also be declared unconstitutional, invalid, and unlawful. But here's a very interesting story making the rounds, and I'll also heard you touching it. Magashule's lobbyists have likened him to former President Jacob Zuma and argued that he too will eventually ascend to the top position in the African National Congress, and he's currently being victimized and chastised really for his radical stance on the economy and nationalization. So I talked to one political analyst, Elvis Masoga, yesterday, and who made a very interesting assertion, Xoli, that the former ANC president Jacob Zuma at the time never fought the ANC in the courts, and as he was placed aside as the ANC deputy president, and in fact had his lobbyists, the likes of Fikile Mbalula as the Youth League president, and that of Braden Zimande as the secretary of the Communist Party, with Zwelinzima Vavi as well, while at the helm of the COSATU at the time really support him to the hilt. So today Magashule may really, as Masuka says, dealt with his chances of ascending to the top position a blow, and with the interested parties now looking to nullify decisions of the NEC and NWC. So the fight in his name intensifies, and the battle lines are drawn.
All right, Benedict, thank you very much for that update outside Luthuli House for us. Let's go back to our legal analysts. Gentlemen, we have very little time left. Let me come to you, Mpumelelo Zikalala. There is also the urgency element about this case that is being brought by Ace Magashule. Talk to us about what the test is going to be as to there is any urgency around Ace Magashule wanting to be reinstated in office.
Definitely, the court is going to look at the following points. They'll first say, do you have a prima facie right to be even to be heard? If we look at Section 19 of our Constitution, it does say that everyone is allowed to participate in any political parties or any political formation, of which definitely he would be able to survive that one. The one which would be a problem is the one of irreparable harm, of saying if you're not given an order to go back to your former position to be the SG, are you going to suffer harm which is irreparable? So now the question would be, did you travel all the internal processes completely at the end of the day? If there are still avenues that you could have gone to and you could have received another remedy, then the court would say you are not going to suffer any irreparable harm. Now let's think within the context of the ANC and the structure that are there. We have the NGC, which could have taken a decision to reinstate him. We have a next conference, which could have also taken a decision to reinstate him. So on that one, I think he's limping a bit, and the chances of him overcoming it are going to be a bit of a problem. Another one is that of a balance of probabilities. So they would say, let's say the chances of you winning this matter when we leave aside the issues of agency and look into the actual merits of that particular matter. So that's where you go into the meat of whether who is correct and who is not correct. Now, the issues that you've raised earlier of saying that, in fact, the ANC Constitution calls you the chief administrator of the organization. How could we have not seen this particular rule and not acted earlier in terms of it? Now, if you look at this rule and its application and equate it to that of an employer and employee, where an employer would say, I'm simply sending you home for the time being so that you come back at a later stage when your name has been cleared. There's not much difference which is taking place. In fact, the ANC has taken a step further by saying, we are going to review your suspension on a 6-month basis. So we are not saying to you, go home and only come back once you've been declared not guilty. We are going to assess the stage in which the matter is going. If we feel as the NEC that you are being treated unfairly and you have been blocked indirectly in performing your duties as the SG, then you'll be invited to come back. Now, that makes the chances of him maybe winning in this particular case a bit slim, regardless of the fact that I still hold the view that all the provisions that are there within the ANC Constitution will be able to meet the constitutional test of the South African Constitution. Or the processes that are there, there's the general rule and the exceptions in which, if you look at them and apply them fairly, it does provide a situation where a person is treated on a case-by-case basis, discussed by people who are able to take decisions on a democratic basis, and if they so feel that your rights have been infringed, they will say to you, come back and perform your duties as the SG.
All right. Benedict Phiri, very briefly for us, Ace Magashule deciding to suspend the president. Does he have authority to do so? Because if we read Rule 25.7, it's quite clear that the Secretary General can do this acting on the authority of the NEC or the NWC. Does he have a case here?
Xoli, he doesn't have a case, and I'll put my head on the block around that. I mean, the arguments he's raised are very circuitous, you know. Firstly, he doesn't rely on 2570. He says it's unconstitutional. He relies on the broader resolution, which he would fall part of. So, you know, why is he not stepping aside, and on what basis would he have to get to suspend the president? So I think that's one of the definitely more weaker areas of his case in this particular instance, Xoli.
All right, Benedict Phiri and Mpumelelo Zikalala. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the time being. We remain with Sbu Ngalwa in studio here. He's going to be my co-anchor for the day.